All right, man. I know we talked a little bit before, but still, for those who are not familiar with who you are or what you've been doing, can you like introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Associate Director of the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab at University of Kansas, part of Tsai Human Performance Alliance. And for myself, I will say that I'm living in a gap between lab setting, lab research, and applying it in sport-specific aspect. Primarily, I work with basketball players worldwide, volleyball players, male, female, soccer athletes, judo athletes. So yeah, broad spectrum of athletics. But my goal is to bring everything that we have found in the lab, all innovations in applied setting to help athletes reach their full performance potential.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, like I said before we start recording, the reason I want to invite you on is because like obviously NBA is starting doing this biomechanics thing, and a lot of college, a lot of baseball team have like they've been doing this for years. So just me personally, I would like to reach out to like learn from all you guys. So I guess the first thing I want to ask in terms of the whole biomechanics testing is um in your experience, like if you're gonna come up with some sort of battery of testing, what would it be like for basketball?
Well, I will tell you this. First, it has to be applied. It has to mimic sport-specific demands. Doing counter movement jumps with swimmers, it's not applied. And it doesn't apply for the sport that they're competing at. On the first place, we have to know the game, we have to know the sport, we have to know athletes who we are working with, right? So we can tailor specific tests to the game slash practice demands of these athletes. So when I look at athletes' performance, right, I look at it as like, building a house, right? So we have a foundation, which is athlete health, muscle, bone, ligament, any kind of tissue, or just look at it as a health. They have to be healthy in order to perform. Well, it's funny because there's a lot of healthy people that don't have skills that NBA or WNBA players do, right? So the skill component is very large. So when we're building that house, I think that foundation is overall athlete health. Then we can build power, strength, change of direction ability, agility, right? So we can start adding layers and layers and layers. But I think the top layer, which I call roof, which often determines are you going to win or lose the game, is that skill component. So even that is something that we are very heavily researching right now from biomechanical standpoint of view. We're looking at a biomechanics of free throw 2 point, 3 point shooting motions, step in shooting motions, layups. Something in the future that we're working on is like a sky hook, like Kareem level. So all that stuff I have been working for many years. And to be honest, probably a small percentage of everything I do it's published, and that's a lot because so far I think there has been 120 plus publications that we were able to publish over a period of 5 years, but there is so much that's unpublished, and that is tough, merging that academic publishing demands with applied setting. But I think that the biomechanics initiative it is good. And when we're selecting tests, I wanted to circle back regarding that. The tests have to mimic game demands.
Nice. I was actually talking to the biomechanist. He works for Thea,
Hmm.
and he's been saying like he know a lot of college basketball are trying to do this shoot three free throw lab, like trying to capture free throw. So like you said, like you do free throw, 3 point, like maybe layup or sky hook. Um remind me again, like what system do you guys use? Is it uh
So we actually partner with DARI. I have a lot of experience working with many systems. I have had chance to work with Qualisys, well, slash Thea, many other systems, right? But something that we have chosen as a great foundation and company that we have partnered to develop with, which allowed us to produce um, the metrics as quickly as possible. And I think that we're the only one with a combination of everything that we can do that an athlete can come in, shoot regularly, free throw 2-point, 3-point sessions, and at the end of the shooting session have data to look at. So that is basically in and out 30 minutes, complete analysis. So we have found very successful partnership with DARI in this case, like a markerless motion capture system that we have used for functional movement screening, as well as shooting analysis. And we can do basically anything. Right now that we have perfected something that's largely built on the research that I have done on 15 plus research publications, combines the hardware with the software and the research aspect to produce something that's very applicable, very innovative. And I think it's next level analysis. It's a Moneyball, right? That can help athletes get better. And I will just say this: I will be speaking in July in Las Vegas, and people that are interested from NBA can reach out to me and see this system, like a demo of this system, and they can always reach out, and we're more than happy to, talk about that shooting analysis.
Nice, nice. All right. So, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. What, mm, outside like, because I used DART before, outside like joint angle, outside of motion, outside like jump height, like what are some metrics you track? Do you also look at like the joint angle curve, the joint moment curve, that kind of stuff?
You know what? There's a bunch of metrics that I can look at. I will tell you this, if we're just focusing on a counter movement jump test, you can look at over 200 metrics. But my question at the end, and when I work as a consultant with the teams or regard with the athletes individually, out of those 190, 200 metrics, which ones are applicable, right? Let's boil this down. Let's funnel this to a couple of metrics that actually can provide decision making and direction for individuals that are willing to use this, right? If I have a discussion with um, scientists, we can sit down for 3 hours and look at a long list of ground reaction force time curves and many other, right? But again, if we're talking to coaches, it has to be quick. So I like to look at outcome metrics, and when I say outcome, jump height is outcome metric, right? But I also think that strategy metrics, how did you achieve that outcome metric, are of critical importance, like counter movement depth, right? Sometimes we have seen that counter movement jump can remain the same, but a counter movement depth starts changing, right? Eccentric, concentric duration, or braking propulsive phase duration, depending on definition and how that's determined, right? But again, all that stuff can change, which means that athletes, and I will tell you this, I have worked with a lot of pro athletes, and they are great in cheating. They can start changing the depths, they can start changing the eccentric, concentric phase durations just to achieve the same jump height, right? And I say this, because they are experts in what they do, but there's a lot of different metrics that you can look at. You can take a peek at asymmetries, but something that always drives me crazy is when somebody will put a number and say this asymmetry is not proper, or it is very large, or I mean, of course, if you're working with a baseball player and pitcher that's pitching like thousands pitches per day as a practice, of course there are going to be asymmetries, right? But is this asymmetry really going to be performance dependent, right? How are you going to put it into the context? So I think that there's so many metrics that you can use, but I like to look at a comprehensive picture, right? I like to include different tests, sometimes even for different athletes within the same sport and the same team, in order for me to have a proper objective driven decision for that specific athlete and for their needs. But something that I will mention here, the paper that I'm very happy that it finally came out, we looked at an NBA drafted athletes versus non-drafted athletes in counter movement vertical jump metrics. And we have found significant difference in these absolute terms, in absolute force and power, right? So when we look at relative, I think sometimes people love to look at a relative, um, force, right? Which I think it is good. Relative force should be included, or relative power, right? Adjusted for athletes' body mass, right? But sometimes if their relative numbers are the same, but you have a 275, 280 pound athlete, and you produce same amount of relative force, think about that athlete just driving through the basket. It's like a plow. It's just gonna go through the lane. You can't even stop that. So that's when relative force, really doesn't apply to that magnitude, right? But I think that paper, it's pretty interesting. It just got published in Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So yeah, anybody that's interested, you can reach out to me. I will send them a copy, or they can see it online.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you said, you mainly look at output metrics, but isn't or like jump height or symmetry, isn't that kind of the same thing you can look on force plate? Why do you need a biomechanics lab for that?
So actually, that's what I was talking about. Force plates, right? Motion captures. They can add big value to it, because we can look at kinematic chaining. We can look at a peak angular velocity of the joint. We can estimate center of mass. We can see the strategy, right? So everything that I have previously mentioned pertains to force plates, right? So biomechanics lab comes back to the question that I was talking about, how that outcome is achieved, right? So we can look everything joint by joint. The big issue that I think should be resolved in the future is we're getting more and more and more and more data, but how we funnel that data back to performance outcomes. And I think that that's where we should bring lab environment to applied environment to start really bridging that gap. And everybody talks about bridging that gap, but I think the next level on this in this field of sports science is just working directly with the people that influence some adequate decision needle movement, right? We have to start implementing um, applicable stuff from the labs, right? But I think this biomechanical testing, it can be beneficial if done properly. Well, there's a lot of different issues that can produce. Athlete commitments, time availability, scheduling. I can only imagine, 82 games NBA season. When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? I think that those are all things that have to be taken into account. Is it valuable? Absolutely. Should it be done? Yes. Can we really obtain valuable information? Yes. But everything that I have said yes previously, it's contingent on how the tests are performed, how consistent is the data. What about athlete compliance? So there's a lot of different aspects that we have to pay attention to, that we have to consider before we just start making decisions on a data that is collected. But overall, can that be beneficial? Is there potential for that to add to the better understanding of athletes' performance capabilities? Yes. But there is a lot of ifs, if you ask me.
Yeah. Um, so all right. So talk to me about like shooting, your biomechanics for shooting. Um, in terms of the motion capture, and yeah, in terms of mocap, like what are you looking at?
So, something that I have seen in the literature, and my doctoral dissertation was based on this. It is biomechanics of free throw, 2 point, and 3 point shooting motions, right? Um, So something that we have focused on is preparatory phase, and I have probably coined that term preparatory phase, like a initial concentric phase of the shooting movement, right? Um, as well as transition phase. What I call transition phase is from the moment you catch the ball until you release the ball. And if you look at the literature, what exists right now, everything. Well, I'm not going to say everything, but a lot of research primarily focuses on trajectory, entry angle, location where the ball entered the rim, right? Release angle, release height. So everything spins around release aspect, right? And I think that it is very important for us to pay attention to what happens prior to the initiation of the shooting motion, as well as what produced that outcome, what led us to get to the point of release height and release angle that we have seen and analyzed, right? So we developed a system based on a research that I have done that can actually detect these metrics, as I previously mentioned, very quickly, and usually overall athlete experience. And we have piloted this with many pro players and showed that it works. We have even had players that we have um, worked with over a couple of months, and improvements in shooting percentages and the mechanics related to the mechanics that they have shown were 4 to up to 13% for some, right? So that is, especially on the pro level, that is tremendously large margin, right? But that falls under that skill assessment that I think can be added to overall performance that builds on an athlete's health parameters. And research that we have published even shows that the variables that we focus on, for example, lower body biomechanics, can discriminate between proficient and non-proficient shooters in 94% of cases, right? Just by looking at these metrics without looking at outcome, right? So that is very, very strong, right? So that just says how valuable the metrics that we include in our analysis are. Um, and we have since then we have added many other parameters, right? We have published new study looking at a three-point shooting accuracy, where we have added joint mean and peak angular velocities, center of mass, many other parameters, right, that can better depict athletes' performance and shooting ability. But I will say, so far, we have found that to be very non-invasive, time efficient, and practitioners like it because athletes shows up, they do what they're supposed to do. They're doing their best. That's what they are, and we're there to collect the data and help them even get better.
Yeah, all right. Break it down for me. After you done a round of like let's say after you've done one round of like data collection in terms of like the guy's free throw or like 2 points, um you get the data. What do you do next?
Work with the
Uh
performance teams usually. So sometimes we'll work with athletes if that is a one-on-one athlete interaction. Usually, if they're pro athletes, they're coaches that we are going to be closely working with because again, that is a mutual product of data-driven decision making, right? Usually, either with the shooting coaches, director of player personnel, whoever it is. So we can find the data, work on getting even more confidence in data as we're obtaining larger data sets. So that is basically our approach. And I have previously mentioned it has shown to be uh, very, very beneficial for some players.
hmm. So is it all right? Let's start by do, let me start by asking you this. So for the shooting, is it oftentimes the lower limb mechanics affect, is this one gonna make it or not?
It is not just lower limb mechanics. We have to start with the lower body. It's a lot of upper body as well, and that's what I have mentioned. When I look at the data based on parameters that we take away from the data sets, I will sit down and see for what athlete specific metrics are key contributors and that they have the greatest weight in determining miss or made outcome, right? And if right now we're talking about NBA athletes in this case, right? Like if we're thinking about like novice athletes, that's a little bit different story. But when we're talking about pro level athletes, it is miss and made. It is why, for example, Kevin Durant missed the shot. Why Steph Curry missed the shot. They're some of the best shooters that we have, right? But the real question is that we are trying to examine, if we're working with a pro level athletes, what happens when they miss.
Hmm. So, do you like in your experience, is it often like some like a certain metrics that if you change it, it could make them better, or like different athletes there
Yeah,
have like
I, will-
different movement
I will say
strategies?
this. For example, positioning your elbow lower, but not just like by extending your shoulder, right? By having a greater flexion in the knees, ankles, and hips, right? As well as a wider stance. That has been one of the most fundamental and easiest adjustments that we were able to make that ultimately induced performance improvements in free throw, 2 point, as well as 3 point shooting, right? So, those are some of the lower body adjustments that we targeted, right? Like a knee flexion, ankle flexion, hip flexion, um, torso. When I look at a torso, is the position of the torso in near vertical? What is the release angle, right? What are the joint angular velocities, mean and peak angular velocities? Often that or this balance between these variables is what characterizes missed outcome within proficient shooters, right? So that is all that we have looked at, and there is many more that we add or take away depending on who we are working with, if that's pro athlete.
Nice, nice, nice. And outside of that, like how hard is it to change these athletes like pattern?
You know, I will say sometimes very hard, sometimes not too hard. And I have been part of situations where we have implemented this innovation that has worked pretty quickly and that athletes have adopted that adjustment pretty quickly. But sometimes it does take time, especially if athletes don't believe in that change. But if they see previous examples, which we have even more and more and more to document, um, they're more open to implementing the change. So that again depends on coach's desire to intervene. But at the end of the day, that is how decision is made, right? We have to have confidence in data that we have, amount of data that is collected. And when I say confidence, it's not less than 0.05, right? Like that p-value statistic in a lab. It is different measures that we can look at possible impact of this data.
Mm. And another question that I think practitioner would be really interested is I was actually talking to the biomechanist at Miami Marlins, and
Mhm.
she was saying like having the biomechanics lab without the motor learning part, it's not going to be helpful. And when we talk about motor learning, we just mentioned like how like fast or like what kind of cueing we can change it. I think and I think the next phase is like, all right, let's say we were able to change it during practice. Is it able to transfer that new skill to like in game? Even if it's just in game free throw.
Well, look, free throw, that is always non-defender based, right? So improving the free throw is probably the largest margin that you can start with. But I will tell you this, improving the shot in the last 2 or 3 seconds when somebody is just shooting to shoot a ball, uh, that's not the shot that I would target because that is not their natural shot. That is not what characterizes their shooting motion, right? It is just the shot that they have to take off to, you know, don't go over the 24-second shot clock, right? Um, but we can always start with free throw. And we're focusing usually on free throw unless our clients, coaches, or athletes would want to focus on something else, right? Like step in 3-point shots, right? If the athlete is performing those. But cueing, there's a lot of other aspects of shooting motion. And I think that there's always um, stuff that we can add, right? But I always start from the core issue. What about open shot, no defender, no audience, no pressure? Let's see, can you actually make 100% of those, right? Well, nobody's perfect, right? But let's try to optimize that first. Then we can start looking at your biomechanics, how that changes, with the cueing, with audience, with the presence of defender, 5 meters, 3 meters away, 1 meter away, right? So I love Nikola Jokic. Like I think he's one of the best, if not even the best, basketball player in the world. And when I look and play, to me everything looks fluid, right? And the biggest benefit of him being able to shoot and having amazing touch is being able to release that ball very high, which is very advantageous, not just at the shots around the rim, but as well as for 3-point shooting motions that he can be very successful at.
Mm. Um, so have you done anything outside of basketball, like tracking biomechanics? Can you share
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit with me?
we have done a lot we mean like sports.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Volleyball, we have done a lot with volleyball serve. We have done a lot with the blocking motions, and we have published many studies related to volleyball specific performance. Track and field, decent amount. Couple of papers are published. Soccer, we have analyzed jump related and force time related metrics post ACL surgery, and we have worked with water polo players. We have worked with judo players, like a martial art players. So there's a large spectrum of athletes that we have worked with. But I will say, from my perspective, um, probably 50% is for sure basketball, and I'm probably a little bit selfish there because I'm a former collegiate basketball player, and that is the game that runs through my veins. But yeah, so that's probably where that comes from. But yeah, we work and have a great collaborations with many volleyball teams across Europe.
Nice, nice. So, stupid question, but need to ask it anyway. Um, so when you do the biomechanics testing for volleyball,
Mhm.
start with volleyball, like what you already mentioned a little bit, you do serve, you do block, but outside of that, what else do you look at?
Something that I like to add is lateral jumps. Why? Because that relates to the movement that they are doing on a court, and I think that is something that should be added. And some testing protocols do embed lateral jumps performed on a 3D force plates, right? Um, and why do I say that? Because I think counter movement jump that's performed on force plates, portable force plate system, it is good. It should be done. We need to utilize it. We can get a lot of good information, but it has a limit. And when I say it has limit, I have seen many people try to put and make, let's say, many individuals, I have witnessed this, try to make fatigue decisions based on a counter movement jump. And my question is, well, what protocol did you use? And somebody will say, well, we have seen strong fatigue related changes post, like quad extensions. And I said, wait. That's a quad extension. That is a lab test. These individuals, participants, were driven to failure. So yes, of course, you're going to see force time changes when somebody's performing tough tests, right? Like a VO2 max or other tests, which I'm not saying those protocols are wrong. I'm just saying they're more tailored to be lab specific. But if we're trying to use something, we have to see in a sport specific setting, are there changes in performance that we can monitor, right, that are potentially fatigue induced. And I'm saying this, that fatigue is very, very, very complex. It is not one metric, one issue, and we're done, right? Um, why am I saying this? Because we have published multiple papers where we have seen with professional athletes, I have to say this, with well-trained professional athletes, where we have seen no changes in counter movement jump metrics pre-post game. We have even tested athletes pre-post EuroLeague game. We have even tested athletes during a simulated professional game, right? So professional athletes were competing in a 5x5 format, right? Like a regular competitive style. We have tested them baseline, like before the game, post first quarter, like European style, halftime, post third quarter, fourth quarter, right? As well as 30 and 60 minutes after, right? So what we have seen, no change in counter movement jump height as well as other metrics. So somebody will say, yeah, these players are not fatigued. And I say that is a bold assumption. They're either well trained to sustain the effort and performance, but they did have game-like fatigue because they played for 2 hours straight, right? And there was a pretty competitive game, right? So, I think that there's a lot of different factors that we have to take into account when we're looking at performance monitoring technologies. But counter movement jump, I use that because a lot of people are using it especially these portable force plate systems um, with softwares that can provide you valuable insight, right? But I think that it should be done, but there's a limit, and we shouldn't overclaim with data that we have, right?
Nice, nice. I love this. I love this. Um, all right, what about track? What do you look at?
What about
What about track?
track? Oof, we have done a lot of unilateral assessments. We have done a lot of hamstring strength. We have done a lot of force frame, like adductors, abductors. We have seen sometimes the dose deficiencies. In this case, especially for these, I call them unilateral sports. Basketball is all over the place. Soccer, it's multi-directional. Volleyball too. But when you think about running and sprinting, it's usually just one line, unless you have longer races, right? But we have found sometimes that asymmetries in these sports, especially if they're strength related, besides other factors like kinematic chaining. But in this case, let's stay on this test as it's simple, right? We have found that asymmetries are related to some performance diminishments, right? So 10% in this case, again, I'm not saying that 10% is a cutoff criteria here. I'm just saying in specific case with athlete that we have worked with, and again, not as a general 10% cutoff, right? Um, have been shown to be related to some performance improvement in 100-meter sprinters, right? So, that is Nordic curls. We have looked at a hamstring strength at different angles, right? Kind of velocity muscle, right? If we call it, right? So that is what we have done with track athletes, for example.
Hmm. So, uh, go back to no, no. How about this? So, what like as a basketball strength coach, what can we learn from all these testing, like the testing you guys did with basketball, or like what can we learn from the testing you did with volleyball?
So the testing that we do, well, do you want to talk about published stuff, unpublished stuff, applied stuff?
I want everything. I want everything you like all the thing you can't talk about.
Yeah, well, that's $1 million question. But I will say what we do, regardless, some part is published. And again, I don't think that what I have published, and I have published a lot, I don't think that reflects everything that we do. As I say, there might be just like a 10% of what I have done. Because sometimes that actionable data that you do, it's not even publishable, right?
And a lot of stuff you can't publish because that.
Yeah. But let's say about this, like interventions, right? With a shooting. Let's come back to basketball, right? Like interventions with the players that we when we have implemented these systems, right? Where we have implemented these analysis and worked with the coaches that ultimately led to improvement in the shooting percentage, right? One athlete had an issue with a lateral elbow deviation, right? So it was like shooting like this, and it had a really bad problem of tucking the elbow in. But that was a multi-factorial issue. Why? Because through FMS, like a functional movement screenings, we have found that he had a lack of mobility in a right shoulder. So without that, we would just keep forcing this. And that's why I say biomechanical testing is good and should be done because it supplements everything that you do. It is just how you put a puzzle together, right? So
Any
for
stuff.
this,
And you can't only just do jumps. You have to do shit. Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
You
No,
do
you
it.
can't. You can't. You can't. You
Yeah, that's
cannot.
what I say. Well, you can, you can only do the jumps, but you're gonna
Yeah,
miss.
you're gonna miss a lot.
Yeah, exactly. It is just the one piece of the puzzle, and I use that analogy all the time. If you want to do only jumps, oh yeah, you can really do it, right? Um, but what data you're gonna get and how influential, yeah, that's TBD to be, but let's say this, with this athlete, we have added actually functional movement screenings, and we have found that there's strong issues with internal and external rotation in the right shoulder, as well as flexion and extension, which ultimately we figured out, okay, we have to work with physio team to improve mobility because that athlete did have some issues in a history, right? So we worked with a physio team, again, to improve that aspect, and then worked with coaches to improve the shooting mechanics because the athlete mobility is improved and he was able to accomplish what he was asked to do. And that induced actually 5% to 6% improvement. Um, I was saying free throw and a couple of percent improvement in 2 point, 3 point shooting percentage over the season, right? So there was a between
That's a
postseason and
win.
preseason, right? When interventions are usually made of that kind, but it was a very um, I would say objective decision, and we have worked with the coaches that really trusted in this, and we were able to deliver this and have large impact on athletes' performance. And again, somebody will say 3-4% improvement, it's not large, and
No, it
if
is.
you make 2 or 3 shots per game more, that is a almost 9% margin. So that is worth of millions of dollars.
Yeah, yeah. So I would imagine like when you do the sky hook or when you do even more uh movement specific to basketball or movement specific to like volleyball, you probably it will have you probably have more cases that are kind of related to this. Oh, you found out maybe his thoracic spine is stuck. That's maybe is causing like his, I don't know, elbow or like somewhere else, right?
So I think that a great example of that is how the athlete uses that kinematic chain, right? When I played, and again, you're working with athletes with a greater basketball talent than me. I was good and I could shoot, but my one of the best moves that I had was a sky hook. Really, I have developed a sky hook that one of my coaches, Mike Dean, he was a head coach of Marquette, Lamar. He was at James Madison when I played, and I love him. Not just that he's my basketball coach, he's like my life mentor. But something that we have worked on a lot is that sky hook, right? It is unguardable move. It is really like Kareem. I mean, we talk about some of the best, that play the game of
Damn, you really
basketball.
love Skyhook. You really love Skyhook.
Yeah. But like if you do, if you perfect that movement, that is unguardable. You're either gonna score or you're gonna get fouled and you get a two free shots, right? So just analyzing that is something that we're working on right now. I'm not going to share so much right now because I would like new steps that we're going to push out there to be even more influential, but some good stuff is coming down the line. And we have found, that some offsets in these kinematic chaining can be very problematic for some individuals that are even willing to perform these shooting motions, right? So everything relates to, how can we make that athlete better, right?
Mm. All right, I want to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned that a lot of times uh athletes can cheat force-weight jump, which is often the case when we work with elite athlete, right?
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of like monitoring fatigue, thoughts on that?
You know how that's done. I think that is that is. I have been a part of teams where I have contributed substantially with my input from sports science. But again, I was a part of that team because nutritionists had to weigh in, sports ecologists had to weigh in, strength coaches, of course, had to weigh in, coaches had to weigh in, right? So there's different ways of how we can quantify fatigue. Somebody will say RP. Well, that is very subjective, right? Um, but let's come back to this jump testing. That I say could it could tell you a little bit about like maybe fatigue induced changes that could be affected. And again, we have found sometimes, depending on external load that these athletes experience, their internal load, that these metrics change, and they can change, usually on eccentric side, right? Like a braking phase, right? That's where we have found to be more impact on these acute bouts of fatiguing, right? But I will tell you this. This is true story. So we're working with one of the teams, like a top level team, and the athlete is jumping. What was it like 40 centimeters, right? Um, it's his first jump or second, right? And he jumps second time. It was like 40, 41, right? And I say, okay, let's delete this one. Let's do two more, but you make them really good. At that moment, his girlfriend comes in. He jumps 48. And I say, come on, man. It was like 1 second, before. She just walked in, you just jumped 48. And he was jumping 40, right? So I say, if that's not impact on performance, like in a way of like how many other factors can influence? Are coaches here? Are coaches watching? Are scouts there? Right? There's so many other factors that can impact your testing results. And I have mentioned one funny one because I think that anybody that listens this would laugh, and they might even have other stories
That
when they were
that
the athletes in this, right?
yeah,
But
that was cool.
yeah, but thinking about this, how many other factors can influence this? I think the protocols that we do have to be as consistent as and reliable as much as we can. Especially when we're working in a professional level setting or any setting. In order for us to make decisions, we have to address validity and reliability of these testing protocols, right? So I think that queuing, you have already alluded on that. You have mentioned that it should be consistent. It has to be consistent, right? Whether you're telling athlete, yeah, jump high, or you're always there cueing the athlete, push the ground as explosively as possible, right? So, what cues are you giving athlete? Are they changing? Are you having a visual output that you're trying to beat? Are you competitive? Are you competing against yourself? Sometimes we have found that showing athlete um, their jump height, for example, would make them try to beat that, right? So, oh, you have jumped 40 centimeters, all right? And he'll be like, oh, no, 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 I can do more. So they will go more, right? So I think that it depends how you organize your testing sessions, where you do it. But at the end of the day, I'll repeat myself here, but we come back to reliability and validity. And what is the setting that we're performing this testing in?
Mm. All right, last question. Obviously, like it's probably the best to do at like more and more testing as possible. But like, what would be like an ideal like testing frequency for you in your experience to like help make some changes?
Well, on the first place, the most testing that should be done, in my opinion, when athletes should get heavily tested is preseason, right? When they're preparing to enter the season, because in my opinion, that is a baseline, right? That is foundation that we are working with throughout the season, right? Why am I saying the most? Because the more tests, the more confidence in the data we have that we can obtain during the preseason period. Because you're not making large interventions 40 games after, right? Like a mid-season. Um, I think that that is the part, but it's always question, are we over testing? And I think the data without implementation is just noise, right? So the data that we collect has to be impactful. And we always have to ask ourselves, because everybody's using this or doing that, is that right? Is that going to help my athlete? Are there better tests that we can use? Um, but frequency of the testing, I think that it can really depend on athlete schedule, on intensity of the testing protocol, right? I was fortunate enough to implement, for example, FMS screening. Like I think in NBA, the new initiative is 3 to 4 times per season, correct?
Yeah.
We have been doing 12 per year. So we had professional athletes that we have tested on monthly basis. So we have seen changes and we have shown that to be very successful. But again, the way how we implemented that was guided by my supervision. It was well organized to make sure that athletes are compliant, that the outputs are adequate, right? But again, what we have done, some athletes didn't need 12 times, right? So, I can't tell you the minimum number, right? You have an athlete recovering from injury. If they're recovering from injury and we're trying to make return to play claim, right, with a multidisciplinary team of performance practitioners, then it's probably going to be a little bit more testing for us to be more sure or confident in decision that is going to be made, right? But I don't think that I can put a number for specific tests. It depends on time availability. It depends on intensity of the tests. It depends on athletes' statuses, right? At specific part of the season. And any test that I would embed is time efficient and non-invasive. That would be my number one choice, and it has to spin around that. And there has to and must be value for the athlete.
Nice, nice, nice. All right. That's all the question I have for you today. For those who are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they find you and where can they find your research?
Well, my research, a lot of articles is usually open access on Google Scholar. If they don't find something that they're looking for, they can always reach out to me via Instagram or LinkedIn. I think that Instagram, because I travel a lot, I usually post a lot of research there to disseminate the knowledge. It is dr.dimitrije.cabarkapa, my first and last name, which is hard to spell sometimes. But yeah, they can always find me there and reach out, and I'm always more than happy to connect with either researchers or applied practitioners.
Nice, nice.